Before you start with a Casper to Casper, you really want to get started with something that might seem more awkward at first, and that's the nose Casper to Casper. The reason for that is that a nose Casper to Casper will just roll around. The board doesn't actually really leave the floor much. It makes it much easier to throw, and it'll get you used to catching a Casper. Because until this point, if you've been following these tips, you've probably only really pulled it into Casper other than that one trick. Now, the other thing I should point out is that at this point, you really want to have grip tape on the underside of your tail. This is especially true if you've got steeper kicktails. Catching this will become a lot easier with just a little bit of grip under there. It doesn't need to be anything major, just enough to hold your foot and to stop it sliding off. There are two different approaches to starting this trick. The way that I learned it many years ago was to roll backwards into it, because that way the momentum will, in theory, ping the board end over end, making the Casper to Casper a little bit easier. But I'm going to recommend you don't learn it that way, because the problem with that is you're reliant on that momentum. You're not really learning the technique. So instead, we're going to start this stationary from rail. That means not only do you need to be able to get into rail, but you should also probably learn to go from rail to Casper. And make sure you're doing it without either foot touching the floor. Not the front foot, not the back foot. This has to be a solid Casper before you can get started. The back foot position on the Casper is really crucial at this point. You might have got used to doing Caspers with your foot a little bit closer to the heel side than normal. Try to avoid that. Hang your toes over slightly. That's where this little bit of grip tape and actually this solid edge of the skid plate is really going to help. You also don't want to be right on the floor, otherwise you're not going to be able to push it through. Aim for this position at all times. Front foot position, on the other hand, isn't as crucial. I mean, you don't want to be in the middle of the board, just somewhere up at the front truck and fairly deep on the board. Also, no foot on the floor. This really has to be balanced and lifted. Doing it from here is cheating. It's not actually a Casper. Make sure you lift and pull from this point. Even though you're starting in a more natural position than the nose Casper to Casper, this is a much harder technique. Whereas with a nose Casper to Casper, you're basically just using the back foot, the one that's underneath, to pick the board up and let it roll through. On this trick, the foot that's on top, which is also the back foot in this case, has to do most of the work. Your front foot's going to lift, but it's your back foot that's going to make this landable in the Casper. You've got to lift up to here, and then this foot has to push underneath the board, pushing through here almost like an impossible. And as it does so, it's going to press on this side of the board. That is what gives it that little tip, that little half flip, because the board's going to roll through like this. Now, when you start doing this, you might just dip on the toe and use mostly your front foot, in which case it's basically just going to roll over, and it will be too close to the floor to get your feet underneath. It's really important that you don't just lift from here. The back foot has to cut through the tail. It has to push as hard as it can up this way, because as it does that, it will lift this end of the board high enough that you can stab your foot underneath it and catch it back to the Casper. This bit is the hardest part of the video for me, because I'm going to intentionally try and do this wrong, undo something like 10 years of programming, of best practice, to try and illustrate what I was just saying. I'm going to get into rail, and I'm going to get into Casper, but instead of using my back foot to drive under the board, I'm going to rely on my front foot to lift it. And let's see what happens. I honestly wasn't trying to land that to nose Casper, probably force of habit. But you can see what I'm talking about. If the front foot does all the work and lifts it, the board will just roll around on the tail. It will go from here and it will roll like that. The back foot's still pushing here, that's what gives it that little flip, but it will just roll and it will come down into a nose Casper position. There's no space for your front foot to get under it ready for the Casper if you use that technique. So now I've moved to a closer angle so you can see what happens when I do this right. The back foot is going to do a lot more work. Get into rail, it's the most solid way of getting into a Casper, most predictable. Drop down, get into the Casper, making sure the back foot is as solid and as deep onto the tail as it can be. And then I'm going to push that back foot up and under the board. That gave me loads of room so I could just stab my front foot underneath it and catch it cleanly. As you might imagine, for a trick that is so dominated by the back foot, basically every way this can go wrong comes back to that back foot. Now, we've already covered the fact if you can't get your front foot under, it's because the back foot isn't pushing through the board enough. It's not lifting that tail to get enough space for the front foot. But the other problem you'll have quite a lot, particularly when you're learning, although I still do it by mistake sometimes, is you'll get that lift, but either the board will come down grip side up, which is a rarity for me now, thankfully, but every so often it'll come down kind of on the rail. Now, as you can imagine, trying to catch a Casper like that, not fun. Now, the way to avoid that, what actually causes that, is your back foot position not being correct. If your back foot is too far back, too far towards the heel, then you're not going to be able to push through the board to get that flip. You really want the ball of your foot to be about here, about where this grip tape ends on my board. That is the sweet spot, because that is just far enough off the axis to push through and get that flip. The other problem can be weight distribution, and this is what catches me out most of the time. You really don't want to be on the heel. You don't want the board to be rocking back even slightly this way. Make sure you're in a solid and central position, because then as you lift, you're in a prime position to push through that and get the flip. Now, it's very important. You don't want to be starting off on your toes. You don't want to be rocking the board that way. And you also don't want that foot overhanging the board. Not too much. You don't want it to be touching the floor, because all that happens then is the board will escape behind you. Remember, ball of the foot about here, about where that grip tape ends on my board. That is where you need to be. If you come into this without learning to nose Casper to Casper first, then you're going to be struggling to catch that Casper. Now, I have no sympathy for you. You should have listened to me. I know what I'm talking about. I'm structuring this to try and make it a step-by-step guide, so you're building on top of earlier things. But nonetheless, I'm going to try and help you. Feeling nice, and I've got a lot of time on my hands right now. So, we're going to do something called a drop hop, and I'm never going to do a separate video for drop hops. They are not worth having as a singular trick. They're a bit pointless. Sometimes you'll see people start runs with them, do elaborate finger flip variations, but they're a bit throwaway. And whatever you do, never ever stop mid-run, whether it's for a video or a competition or a demo. Get off your board and do a drop hop. Just don't do it. It breaks the flow. It's pointless. And frankly, I've been told off by Shane Rouse for far lesser offences. And as we all know, what Shane Rouse says, it's golden. Got to pay attention. So, what we're going to do, pick up the board, hold it upside down. Fingers on the grip side of the nose, thumb on the underside, just on the lead hand. I'm going to swing it in like this. Not up high, you don't want to be up by your chin, risk hitting your face. Keep it nice and relaxed. And all you're going to do is, as you swing in, let go, and aim to get your back foot on here for the Casper. It's really all there is to it. And as you do that, just lift this front foot. It's a very, very small hop. So, swing and aim for that tail. That's all there is. Just swing it into a Casper. Now, the one benefit of this is you can do it anywhere. You don't need space. You don't need to be able to roll. You can do this in your basement. You can do it in your backyard. You can do it in an empty car park. You can sit and do this for weeks. And by the end of it, you'll be brilliant at Caspers. Because there's really, no matter whether you're kick flipping, or Casper to Casper, or finger flip to Casper, they're all the same motion. The catch always works the same way. You're just looking to get the back foot on the underside of the tail and keep the front foot underneath. So let's repeat forever and ever until we can do them perfectly. So you might have noticed up to this point in the video, every Casper catch that I've done, I've just immediately flipped out of. It's very hard, literally very, very hard to get the catch so precise that you can just sit there in a Casper like, you know, nothing's happened. It's even harder to get into such a good position on the catch that you can then keep a combo going and link it into something else. Let's be realistic. When you're starting out, just catching a clean Casper and immediately flipping out is golden. That's all you need. As long as neither of your feet are touching the floor, that counts. But I do mean neither foot can touch the floor. Not just the front foot, but the back foot. If the toes are dragging, or if you're hanging off the end of the tail, do it again. Because if you're constantly letting yourself get away with this, or God, even worse, like, that, you will never, ever be able to do anything better with this trick. Focus on getting that back foot position perfect and the front foot off the ground. Do that for a couple of years straight, and maybe then, and only then, could you be the next Yuta Fuji. Me, I'm a little bit rusty on these, so it might take me another couple of years yet. But hey, at least the catch is solid. Back foot on the floor, don't do it. Couple of last notes on this trick, because while getting the technique right is a huge part of being able to do this, there's a lot to consider with equipment as well. See, more than most tricks, the shape of your deck is going to have a huge influence on how this feels. If you have super steep tails, typical street deck for instance, it's going to be a lot harder to catch this. Not impossible, but a lot harder. Your back foot is more likely to slide off the end, especially if you don't have a skid plate and grip tape. Something a little bit mellower, doesn't have to be totally flat, will be much easier to catch. But the actual shape of the tail, that will play a surprisingly huge difference in how well this trick works. Because the wider the tail is, the squarer it is, the harder it is to get it to roll like this when it's in the Casper. And the harder it is to roll like that, the harder it is to get the half flip and get back round. So if you're skating a single kick, which traditionally has quite a square tail and quite a rounded end, start on the nose for this trick because it will roll through much easier. The catch won't feel as nice because you're catching on a kick tail rather than a flat end, but it will roll through the flip so much easier. And if you're skating a double kick with very square tails, I'm thinking the Marius Constantin boards from Cyrus or the Butterfield deck from Skate Kings, you're going to have to work a lot harder on this trick than most. You're really going to have to focus on pushing through this part of the tail as hard as you can in order to make sure you get the half flip as it comes round. They don't want to Casper to Casper easily. Now the other thing to note is that this is quite destructive. So if you don't want to be replacing your deck within the next month, wood screws. These are just, I think, 10mm long self-tapping wood screws. Filling one end of the board with those will really help because as you push through and come around like that, you're going to wear all of this away. Having those wood screws in will stop that from basically razor tailing up the top side of your board. The other thing is that obviously catching a Casper and shuffling around like that, it will destroy your shoes. So again, bulletproof laces, very wear resistant. They will go through 3 or 4 pairs of shoes easy before they snap. Definitely recommend those. And buy some shoe goo or something along those lines to patch up the inside seam here, this bit, because otherwise all of this will disintegrate from doing this trick. But with all that in mind, this is worth learning. It's worth doing, even if you destroy everything you own trying, because it's a great trick. It feels satisfying. Even now, I love doing this trick. Just that catch feels amazing. And it's one of those things that you can do anywhere. Doesn't matter what, doesn't matter who's watching. A Casper to Casper looks flashy. Is that the most important thing in the world? No. Does it go quite well if you're doing demos and getting paid for it? Yep, very guilty of that one. Use and abuse it. So take some time, Get it clean, get it right, but most importantly, have fun.